Hi, welcome to ConflictStory, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
The cold hit me like a slap across the face as I pulled the last box from my truck, my breath forming white clouds in the mountain air. 6 months of planning, 3 days of driving, and finally, here I was at my ski chalet. Our ski chalet, though Margaret would never see it now. The place looked exactly like the photos. Glass front, timber frame, nestled against the pine trees like it belonged there. I'd bought it sight unseen after her funeral, needing something, anything, to remind me that life still had places worth going. I was halfway up the stone walkway when the police lights exploded across the snow. 2 patrol cars, sirens wailing, cutting through the peaceful mountain silence like chainsaws. My first thought was some kind of emergency, maybe a break-in down the road. Then I saw her, Karen Westfield, according to the paperwork I'd glimpsed during the purchase, marching up my driveway like she owned it. Blonde hair perfectly styled despite the wind, designer parka that probably cost more than most people's cars, and an expression that could freeze hell over. She was pointing at me, her voice carrying across the snow-covered yard before the officers even got out of their cars. "There he is. That's the man I told you about." Her voice was shrill, triumphant. "He's trespassing on Homeowner Association property." I stood there, box in my hands, watching this surreal scene unfold. The deputies, 2 young guys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, approached with that careful neutrality cops use when they're not sure who the real problem is. The taller one, name tag reading Morrison, spoke first. "Sir, we've received a complaint that you're moving into a property without proper authorization from the Homeowner Association." I set the box down slowly, my mind racing. "I own this place, bought it 3 weeks ago, closed last Tuesday. I have all the paperwork inside." But even as I said it, I felt that familiar twist in my gut, the same feeling I'd had in Vietnam when something wasn't quite right in the jungle. Karen stepped forward, her boots crunching in the snow. She was maybe 50, with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no in her entire life. "The Homeowner Association keeps a strict schedule of all approved moves. This man is not on our list. He's clearly some kind of con artist." The second deputy, younger and clearly uncomfortable, glanced between us. "Ma'am, if he has legitimate purchase documents—" "Documents can be forged," Karen interrupted, her smile as cold as the mountain air. "We've had problems with squatters before, people who think they can just show up and claim property that isn't theirs." That's when I realized this wasn't about paperwork or schedules. This was about power, about someone who'd gotten used to controlling everything in her little kingdom and didn't like surprises. I'd seen it before, in the army, in corporate boardrooms, in every small town across America. People drunk on tiny amounts of authority, wielding it like a weapon against anyone who threatened their sense of control. "Look," I said, keeping my voice level, "I can show you the deed, the title insurance, the closing documents. Everything's legitimate." I started toward the house, but Morrison's hand moved to his belt. "Sir, please stay where you are until we sort this out." Karen's smile widened. She was enjoying this, I realized. The drama, the power, the ability to humiliate a stranger in front of uniformed officers. "You see, he can't produce proper documentation because he doesn't have any. Real residents go through proper channels." I looked around and noticed we weren't alone. Windows were cracked open in nearby chalets, faces peering out. A woman with gray hair was recording everything on her phone from across the street. An elderly man stood in his doorway, arms crossed, watching like this was better than cable television. The whole neighborhood was getting a show, and I was the unwilling star. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling around us in miniature tornadoes. My hands were getting numb, but not from the cold. I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always said I was too quick to back down from bullies. "Never let them see you sweat, Thomas," she'd whisper whenever we faced insurance adjusters or bureaucrats trying to shortchange us. "Stand your ground." I'm not moving anything else until I see some identification from you, I said to Karen, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. If you're speaking for this homeowner association, I want to see your credentials. Her face flushed red above her perfectly applied makeup. How dare you question my authority? I've been president of this association for 8 years. I know every property, every owner, every legitimate resident. She turned to the deputies. Are you going to let him talk to me that way? Morrison looked tired, like he'd dealt with HOA disputes before, and knew they were never simple. Ma'am, we need to verify the gentleman's claims. If he has proper documentation— He doesn't, Karen's voice cracked with frustration. Trust me, if this man had legitimate business here, I would know about it. We run a tight ship in this community. We have standards, procedures, protocols. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through photos I'd taken of all my closing documents. Here's the deed. Here's the title insurance. Here's the purchase agreement. I held the screen toward Morrison, but Karen stepped between us. Anyone can fake those on a computer, she said. I've seen it a dozen times. These people show up with fake paperwork, move into empty properties, and by the time the real owners find out, they've done thousands of dollars in damage. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. These people. Margaret had been Mexican-American, and I'd heard that particular tone before. The careful way certain people said, these people, when they meant anyone who didn't look like them, sound like them, or come from where they came from. My jaw tightened. Lady, I don't know what your problem is, but I bought this house legally. I can prove it 6 ways to Sunday. What I can't prove is why you think it's your business to harass people on their own property. The word harass seemed to flip a switch in her. Karen's composure cracked, and for a moment I saw something ugly underneath all that polish. Harass? I'm protecting this community from criminals and freeloaders. You show up here with some story about buying property, but you don't follow procedures. You don't respect our authority. You just assume you can do whatever you want. Morrison stepped forward, clearly wanting to defuse the situation. Folks, let's all take a breath here. Sir, if you could just show us the documents inside the house. He's not going inside, Karen snapped. Not until this is resolved properly. For all we know, he's already done damage to the interior. I stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't about procedures or protocols. This was about someone who'd built her entire identity around being the queen of this little mountain kingdom, and I'd had the audacity to show up without asking her permission first. She couldn't let me walk into that house because it would mean admitting she wasn't all-powerful, wasn't all-knowing, wasn't the gatekeeper she'd convinced herself she was. The gray-haired woman across the street was still recording, and I noticed more neighbors gathering. Some looked sympathetic, others suspicious. A few seemed to be enjoying the drama. I realized that whatever happened here in the next few minutes would determine how the rest of my time in this place would go. If I backed down now, if I let Karen humiliate me in front of everyone, I'd never have peace here. But if I pushed too hard, I might find myself spending the night in jail instead of my own bed. Margaret's voice echoed in my head again. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. I looked at Morrison and made my choice. Officer, I'm going to cooperate fully, but I want it on record that this woman has provided no evidence for her claims, no documentation of her authority, and no legal basis for preventing me from entering property I own. I'll show you every document I have, answer every question you ask, but I'm not going to stand here and be accused of crimes by someone who won't even identify herself properly. Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. She sensed she was losing control of the situation, and people like her never go down quietly. Fine, she said, her voice dropping to something almost conversational. Let's see these alleged documents, but when they turn out to be fake, I want this man arrested for fraud, trespassing, and attempting to steal private property. As we walked toward the house, I caught a glimpse of a young man, maybe late teens, watching from a window 2 houses down. Unlike the other neighbors, he wasn't gawking or gossiping. He was watching Karen with an expression I recognized from my own youth, shame mixed with anger. The way kids look when they're embarrassed by a parent who's making a scene. I filed that observation away as Morrison followed me to the front door. Whatever documents I had better be in perfect order because Karen Westfield had just declared war, and something told me she'd been winning these battles for a long time. The question was whether an old soldier who'd already lost the most important thing in his life had anything left to lose, or everything left to fight for. The documents were perfect. Every signature, every seal, every official stamp exactly where it should be. Morrison examined them with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen enough fake paperwork to know the real thing when he saw it. The deed was legitimate, the title clear, the purchase completely legal. Karen stood behind him, her face growing paler with each page he reviewed. "Everything appears to be in order," Morrison finally said, handing the papers back to me. "Sir, you have every right to be here." For a moment, I thought it was over. Karen would have to admit her mistake, apologize, and slink back to whatever hole she'd crawled out of. But I'd underestimated her capacity for denial. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Those documents don't tell the whole story," she said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "The Homeowner Association has bylaws, covenants, restrictions. Just because you bought the property doesn't mean you can move in without following proper procedures." Morrison looked confused. "Ma'am, with respect, property ownership generally includes the right to occupy the property." "Not in a managed community," Karen shot back. "We have standards here. Background checks, reference requirements, approval processes. This man bypassed all of that." She turned to me with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Tell me, Mr. What did you say your name was?" "Thomas Brennan." "Tell me, Mr. Brennan, did you submit an application to the Homeowner Association for occupancy approval? Did you provide 3 years of tax returns? Did you submit to a criminal background check?" I felt the trap closing around me. "Lady, I bought a house. I didn't apply for citizenship in a foreign country." "You bought property in a community with rules," she countered. "Rules that exist to protect all of us from undesirable elements." There was that tone again, the careful emphasis on certain words that made her meaning crystal clear without saying anything actionable. Morrison was starting to look uncomfortable. Caught between legal property rights and local politics he probably didn't want to navigate. "Look," I said, "if there are legitimate HOA requirements I need to fulfill, I'm happy to comply. But right now, I'm standing on property I own, with legal documents proving it, and this woman is trying to prevent me from entering my own house." Karen's smile widened. "Of course, you're welcome to pursue the proper channels. The Homeowner Association office is open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You can submit your application then and wait for approval like everyone else." "It's Saturday," I pointed out. "Yes, it is." The calculation was simple and brutal. She was forcing me to spend at least 2 more nights somewhere else, probably a hotel an hour down the mountain, while she had the weekend to mobilize whatever forces she commanded. By Monday morning, she'd have had time to prepare her defense, rally her allies, and paint me as some kind of threat to the community. Morrison cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm not sure the Homeowner Association has the legal authority to prevent a property owner from occupying his own residence." "Are you a lawyer, Officer Morrison?" Karen's voice had turned sweet as poisoned honey. "Because our association attorney would disagree. We've successfully prevented unauthorized occupancy before." She was bluffing, had to be, but Morrison was a young cop in a small mountain town, and he wasn't about to get into a legal dispute between wealthy property owners. He looked at me with what might have been sympathy. "Sir, this appears to be a civil matter between you and the Homeowner Association. As long as there's no breach of peace." "Breach of peace?" Karen laughed. "Officer, this man was moving furniture into a property without authorization. That's called breaking and entering where I come from." I felt something snap inside me. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was the stress of the past 6 months. Maybe it was just the sheer audacity of this woman, But suddenly, I wasn't grieving widower Thomas Brennan anymore. I was Sergeant Brennan, 1st Infantry Division, and I'd dealt with petty tyrants before. Breaking and entering, I repeated slowly, into property I own, with keys I received at closing, from a sale that was recorded in the county courthouse. I stepped closer to Karen, not threatening, but not backing down either. Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're playing it with the wrong person. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even a little fear. She was used to intimidating people, but she wasn't used to them pushing back. Are you threatening me? She asked, her voice loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. I'm informing you, I said quietly. I'm moving into my house today. If you want to file complaints with your association, your lawyers, or the Pope himself, you're welcome to do it. But you're going to do it from somewhere else, because I'm done with this conversation. I turned toward the house, expecting her to back down. Instead, she played her trump card. Jacob, she called out. Jacob, come here. The young man I'd noticed earlier emerged from the house 2 doors down. Up close, I could see the family resemblance, the same sharp features, the same blue eyes. But where Karen radiated entitled fury, this kid just looked embarrassed and tired. Tell Officer Morrison what you told me about seeing suspicious activity around this property last week, Karen commanded. The kid, Jacob, apparently her son, looked like he wanted to disappear into the snow. Mom, I didn't say... Tell him about the lights you saw, the sounds, the evidence that someone was already illegally occupying this property. I watched Jacob's face cycle through emotions, confusion, embarrassment, and then something that looked like resignation. He glanced at me, and I saw an apology in his eyes before he spoke. I might have seen some lights in the windows a few nights ago. Could have been anything, though. It was a weak lie, delivered by someone who clearly didn't want to tell it, but it was enough for Karen. You see, she said triumphantly, there's been illegal activity at this property. For all we know, this man has been squatting here for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to produce fake documents. Morrison looked from the kid to me to Karen, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Sir, is there any possibility you or someone acting on your behalf accessed the property before today? I've never been here before in my life, I said honestly. I bought it sight unseen, had it inspected by proxy, and drove straight here from Denver after closing. But someone could have given you access, Karen pressed. Someone could have let you stay here illegally before you produce these supposed ownership documents. The beautiful thing about a well-constructed lie is how it forces everyone around it to start questioning obvious truths. Karen was spinning a narrative where my legitimate ownership was actually an elaborate cover story for extended criminal activity. It was insane, but it was just plausible enough to give Morrison pause. I think, the officer said carefully, this situation needs to be resolved through proper legal channels. Sir, given the complications, maybe it would be best if you secured temporary accommodation until Monday when you can address these concerns with the Homeowner Association. I stared at him. You're suggesting I leave my own property because this woman doesn't like that I bought it without asking her permission first? I'm suggesting that discretion might be the better part of valor here, Morrison replied. Let the lawyers sort it out. That's when I realized I'd lost this round. Karen had successfully weaponized bureaucracy, using the natural reluctance of a young cop to get involved in complex property disputes. She'd painted me as either a fraud or a squatter, and while neither accusation would hold up in court, they didn't need to. They just needed to get me off the property long enough for her to consolidate her position. But as I looked around at the faces watching from windows and doorways, I noticed something interesting. The gray-haired woman who'd been recording earlier was now filming openly, her phone pointed directly at Karen. An older man I hadn't noticed before was shaking his head in obvious disgust. And Jacob, Karen's own son, was staring at his mother with an expression I recognized from my own childhood. the look of a kid realizing that maybe his parent wasn't always right. Fine, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'll get a hotel for the weekend. But Monday morning, I'm moving in, and if anyone tries to stop me, they better have more than hurt feelings and made-up procedures. Karen's smile was victorious, but brittle. The Homeowner Association looks forward to reviewing your application through proper channels. As I loaded my boxes back into the truck, I caught Jacob watching me from his yard. When his mother wasn't looking, he mouthed something that looked like, "Sorry." I nodded slightly, filing away another piece of information. In my experience, the children of tyrants usually knew better than anyone just how far their parents were willing to go to maintain control. The drive down the mountain to the nearest hotel was long and cold, but it gave me time to think. Karen Westfield had won this battle through superior local knowledge and political maneuvering. She knew exactly which buttons to push, which fears to exploit, which authorities to invoke. But she'd also revealed something crucial about herself. She was so used to getting her way that she'd gotten sloppy, overconfident. And overconfident people make mistakes. As I checked into a roadside motel that smelled like pine cleaner and broken dreams, I started planning. Karen thought she was fighting some random retiree who'd stumbled into her territory. She had no idea she'd just declared war on someone who'd spent 40 years learning how to fight battles that mattered. Margaret always said I was at my most dangerous when I was angry but calm. She'd have loved this. Monday morning came with fresh snow and crystalline air that cut through your lungs like glass. I'd spent the weekend doing reconnaissance, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the methodical gathering of information that wins real battles. 3 phone calls to the county recorder's office, 2 conversations with my closing attorney, 1 very enlightening chat with the previous property owner who was vacationing in Florida and had some interesting things to say about Karen Westfield. Most importantly, I'd driven back up the mountain Sunday evening and parked at the scenic overlook half a mile from the chalets. With a decent pair of binoculars, I could watch the comings and goings around Karen's house. What I saw confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't just about me. Around 7 p.m., I watched Karen host what looked like a strategy session. 8 neighbors filed into her living room, including the gray-haired woman who'd been recording on Saturday. They stayed for 2 hours, and when they left, 3 of them looked upset. One couple was actually arguing as they walked away. Karen's little kingdom wasn't as unified as she pretended. Now, at 9 a.m. sharp, I pulled into my driveway like I owned the place, which, legally speaking, I did. The Homeowner Association office was a converted garage in Karen's basement, marked by a small brass plaque that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I knocked once and walked in. Karen was seated behind a desk that dominated the small space, flanked by 2 women who looked like they'd been carved from the same block of entitled marble. One was introduced as the association treasurer, the other as the architectural review coordinator. They had the paperwork ready, a stack of forms 6 inches thick, printed on expensive letterhead. "Mr. Brennan," Karen said without looking up, "I trust you've come to submit your occupancy application properly this time." "Actually," I said, settling into the uncomfortable folding chair they'd provided, "I've come to discuss your authority to require one." The treasurer, a pinched woman named Mrs. Hartwell, shuffled through documents. The authority is clearly established in the community covenants, which were recorded with the original plat in 1987. I pulled out my own folder, much thinner than theirs, but carefully organized. Interesting, because according to the county recorder, those covenants were amended in 2019. The amendment specifically removed occupancy approval requirements for purchased properties. I slid a certified copy across the desk. It's all right there in section 12.3. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Mrs. Hartwell grabbed the document, her eyes scanning frantically. The architectural coordinator leaned over, reading along. Karen's face went through several color changes before settling on a shade somewhere between fury and panic. This must be some kind of mistake," Karen stammered. "We never voted on any such amendment." "Actually, you did," I said pleasantly. "October 15th, 2019. Motion carried by a vote of 47 to 12. It's recorded in your own meeting minutes, which are public record." I pulled out another document. "Your signature is right there as association president, certifying the vote count." I watched Karen realize she was trapped. She'd been operating under obsolete bylaws for 3 years, either through ignorance or deliberate deception. Every occupancy denial she'd issued, every application fee she'd collected, every power play she'd made, all of it invalid. "Even so," she said desperately, "there are other requirements. Property maintenance standards, architectural approvals for any modifications." "Which don't apply to simple occupancy," I interrupted, "and which, according to the current bylaws, can't be enforced retroactively against existing purchases." Mrs. Hartwell was still reading, her face growing paler by the page. "Karen," she whispered, "if this is true, we could be liable for—" "It's not true," Karen snapped. "This man is trying to intimidate us with fake legal documents." That's when I played my ace. "That's an interesting accusation," I said, "coming from someone who's been collecting illegal fees for 3 years. I pulled out my phone and set it on the desk. "I had a fascinating conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez yesterday. They moved in 2 years ago and paid your association a $1,500 occupancy fee. According to current bylaws, that fee was illegal." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. They paid voluntarily. Under duress, according to their statement. They were told they couldn't move in without paying. I looked directly at her. That's called extortion in most jurisdictions. The room went dead silent. Mrs. Hartwell and the architectural coordinator were staring at Karen like she'd grown horns. Through the small basement window, I could see neighbors starting to gather outside. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves money. "You're lying," Karen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're making this up to discredit me." "Am I?" I touched my phone screen and a voice filled the room. "She told us we had no choice. Pay the fee or find somewhere else to live. We couldn't afford to move again, so we paid." It was Mrs. Rodriguez's voice, recorded during our phone conversation with her full permission. Karen's face crumbled. The mask of authority and confidence finally slipped, revealing something desperate and small underneath. "I was protecting this community," she whispered, "maintaining standards, keeping out people who don't belong." "People like the Rodriguez family?" I asked. "Or people like me?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. The silence said everything. Mrs. Hartwell stood up abruptly. "I need to call our attorney immediately. If we've been operating under invalid bylaws, if fees were collected illegally—" She turned to Karen with an expression of pure disgust. "Do you have any idea what kind of liability exposure you've created?" The architectural coordinator was already backing toward the door. "I never signed off on any fee collections," she said quickly. "I was only involved in design approvals." I watched Karen's carefully constructed power base crumble in real time. These weren't loyal supporters. They were people who'd gone along with her authority as long as it didn't threaten them personally. The moment that changed, they abandoned ship faster than rats fleeing floodwater. "Where are you going?" Karen called after them. "We need to discuss this as a board." "There's nothing to discuss," Mrs. Hartwell said from the doorway. "You've been operating outside our legal authority. Every decision you've made in the past 3 years is potentially void." After they left, it was just Karen and me in that cramped basement office, surrounded by stacks of worthless paperwork and the wreckage of her little empire. She looked older suddenly, smaller, like she'd deflated. "I suppose you think you've won," she said bitterly. "I think I've exposed the truth," I replied. "What happens next isn't up to me." Through the window, I could see more neighbors gathering, Someone had printed out copies of the amended bylaws and was passing them around. Voices were getting louder, angrier. 3 years of illegal fees, denied approvals, and petty tyranny were about to come, due all at once. Karen seemed to sense the changing mood outside. "They'll turn on me," she said quietly. "Everything I've done for this community, and they'll remember only this." "Maybe," I said, standing to leave, "or maybe this is your chance to make things right." I left her sitting there and walked outside into the crisp mountain air. The crowd of neighbors parted as I approached, some nodding respectfully, others still suspicious. Jacob was there, watching his mother's kingdom collapse from a safe distance. "Is it true?" someone called out. "About the fees being illegal?" "According to the recorded bylaws and county documents, yes," I said. "But you'll want to verify that with your own attorney." An older man I didn't recognize stepped forward. "We paid $1,200 when we moved in 5 years ago. Are you saying we can get that back?" "I'm saying you have legal options you didn't have this morning." The crowd erupted in angry conversations. People were pulling out phones, calling lawyers, texting family members. The gray-haired woman who'd been recording everything approached me with something like admiration. "You knew," she said. "On Saturday when she was giving you that whole song and dance, you already knew she didn't have the authority." "I suspected," I corrected. "I confirmed over the weekend." "So why didn't you just show her the documents then? End it before it started?" I looked back toward the basement window where Karen sat alone in her defeated kingdom. Because someone who abuses power, that blatantly doesn't usually stop just because you ask nicely. They have to be shown, publicly and definitively, that their authority was never legitimate in the first place. Jacob appeared at my elbow, young face serious beyond his years. "She's going to be in a lot of trouble, isn't she?" "Probably," I admitted. "But that's not my doing. She created this situation herself." He nodded slowly. "She always said she was protecting the community. But really, she was just protecting herself from having to share control with anyone else." Smart kid. He understood what it had taken me 3 days to figure out. Karen hadn't been enforcing rules. She'd been manufacturing authority, creating problems so she could solve them, inventing threats so she could protect against them, all to maintain her position as the indispensable guardian of community standards. The crowd was growing larger and more agitated. Someone was demanding an emergency association meeting. Someone else was talking about class action lawsuits. The whole carefully maintained facade of Karen's leadership was dissolving into chaos and recrimination. I walked back to my chalet, finally able to carry my boxes inside without interference. The house smelled like pine and fresh possibilities, exactly the way Margaret and I had imagined our retirement would smell. Through the front window, I could see the ongoing drama in Karen's yard, but it felt distant now, like watching a movie about someone else's life. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Thank you for standing up to her. We never thought anyone would listen." And then another from the gray-haired woman. "Emergency association meeting tonight at 7 p.m. Karen's been voted out as president. Thought you should know." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the thermos I'd brought and sat in my empty living room, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. Karen Westfield would survive this. People like her always do. She'd probably move somewhere else, find another small kingdom to rule, start the whole cycle over again. But she wouldn't do it here, and she wouldn't do it unopposed. Sometimes the best way to defeat a bully isn't to fight them on their terms, but to expose the emptiness of their power. Karen had spent 3 years convincing everyone she was indispensable, that only she could protect their community from chaos. In the end, all it took was one person with the right documents and the willingness to stand up to her to prove that the Empress had no clothes. Margaret always said that justice wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. Today, for the first time since her funeral, I felt like I understood what she meant. The truth had set me free, not just to live in my house, but to remember who I was before grief tried to convince me I was powerless. Outside, The snow was starting to fall again, covering Karen's footprints in my driveway and erasing all evidence of Saturday's confrontation. By tomorrow, it would look like none of it had ever happened, but the amended bylaws would still be on file at the county courthouse, and the neighbors would still remember the day someone finally said no to Karen Westfield. That was victory enough for me.